May prosperity and healing and restoration come to your county. May God take away every curse that has been planted in the ground. May the blood of Jesus wipe away the blood that has been shed here already. May the power of the blood of Jesus wipe away the memories of the bones and the blood and the evil that has been done here. And may the grace of God appear in this Gbarnga County from today in Jesus' name.
Gbarnga is one of the cities that the Healing Jesus campaign team chose to hold its campaigns in Liberia. One main thing it is known for is that it was the headquarters of Charles Taylor's NPFL during the Liberian Civil War.
This war is about the right to self-determination and the safeguard of the sovereignty of this nation.
This is the kind of terror Liberians face every day, the nightmare they have had to live with ever since civil war erupted 6 months ago. And yet, to hear some describe it, one might get the impression such behavior is justified.
This is just an ordinary civilian uprising. It's not a military coup, not a military situation. Ordinary people uprising, trying to bring fair play and justice.
Charles Taylor is leader of the rebels. What he really wants is to be leader of Liberia. His adoring followers, in fact, already call him president.
Our leader,
As a former advisor to the real president, Taylor fled to the United States in 1983 after being charged with embezzlement. Today, with Liberia's economy in ruin, with its government riddled with corruption and its army plagued by desertions, Charles Taylor is back, demanding his old boss resign. And what if he doesn't?
We'll kill him. If he doesn't give himself up, which means that he wants to fight, we'll kill him.
In 1997, Charles Taylor was elected President of the Republic of Liberia. During the Healing Jesus campaigns, we come across many people who are willing and ready to assist us in many different ways. We are truly grateful to them. In Liberia, one such person who not only opened up her home to us, but also provided free accommodation for many members of our team was none other than former First Lady, Mrs. Jewel Taylor, wife of President Charles Taylor.
We are right here in Liberia, in Monrovia, and with me is my wife, Adelaide, and also with me is Mrs. Jewel Taylor, the wife of Charles Taylor and the former First Lady of Liberia. So we are blessed to have a few minutes with her to share some fellowship and to just talk about what it means to be Mrs. Taylor and what it really means to be the former First Lady of Liberia. She also happens to be the senator of the Gbarnga County, and she's one of the most influential women leaders in Liberia today. So you're welcome.
Thank you, sir. It's an honor to have a few minutes of your time. I know how busy you are.
What was it like to be the wife of Charles Taylor? Was he a nice man?
That's a relative term, Bishop, but I think circumstances sometimes determine how people behave. When I met him, he was somebody who was very nice, and I fell in love with him when I was 19. Mind you, he's come through the war. He's become a war hero if you're on one side of the spectrum, or a war criminal if you're on the other side. Bringing our country from a place where very few had control of the resources of our nation, and opening up an avenue where everyone got involved in the process of governance. That kind of experience, I think, changes anyone. So we had a difficult marriage because of the process of war and crisis in our nation. But he was a very good father to his children. He was a good provider. Time-wise, I can say we didn't have much time together, but I think he was a good father and a good provider.
So you fell in love with him when you were 19 years old?
Yeah, 19 years old. Second year at the university.
Wow. Was he also in the university?
No, he had just come from the States on this special program that the then President Talbot had, trying to bring young Liberians from abroad who had gone and gotten their education and come back to work. So he had come home on that program when the coup happened. And Samuel Kayando becomes president, and he was still kept on board, and he became one of the director generals of one of our programs. It was at that point that we crossed paths somehow.
You were not married then?
No.
But you got married. When did you get married?
1997, 6 months before presidential elections in Liberia.
So then you became the official First Lady.
Definitely.
So were there other First Ladies?
No, I was the only First Lady, thank God. But of course, officially, you know, the African situation is a little difficult. Somehow in the minds of traditional African leaders, presidents are also chiefs or kings. And so it's expected that by tradition, as it's been before, that people will have a lot of women around the heads of state, and I think it was that same situation, which is not uncommon in Africa. Of course, it was heartbreaking for me. I come from a Christian family. Our parents were married for more than 50 years. My father was killed during the war. My mother died about 4 years ago.
Your father was killed in which war?
In the same war that came to remove Samuel Kayando. He died in 1994. A medical doctor at the hospital, and at one point they were jostling for territory, and another rebel faction took over for about 30 days, and there was a lot of killing, and he was one of the doctors killed during that period. He was at work, and they had gone and said, someone told them that the Lutheran church, it's a Lutheran facility, had left their money in the safe at the hospital, and so they should give them this money. He said, there's no money here. And they said, well, he was lying. They looked around, they didn't find any money, but they still shot him. Him and 3 other doctors were killed that day.
So is Charles Taylor a Christian? Was he a Christian? Is he a Christian? Was he a born-again Christian?
Let me say he was a Christian. He was not a Muslim, and he was not an atheist. I think he was a Christian, struggling with the issues of doing the things that the Bible tells all of us to do.
What is it like to be a first lady of a president?
I think there are 2 kinds of first ladies, depending on the situation you find yourself. I'm sure at the earlier part of our founding of our nation, and when you look at the old pictures, you know, there's a lot of parties, a lot of fun, a lot of travel, a lot of, you know, the nicer side of things. But when you come in the process of war and crisis, it's completely different. Completely different.
So you didn't have any nice times at all? No parties? You had a grand wedding?
And mind you, that was before I got married. I mean, before my husband became president. After we became president 6 months later, we have border wars of people who had refused to accept the elections result. Why is he president and not me? And so there were maybe 4 or 5 factions at different border points, finding their way, disturbing things.
But was the UN not here at that time?
No, I think that was a mistake. Asking UNMIL at the time, not UNMIL, ECOMOG it was ECOMOG during the time. Nigeria and some other strong countries had sent forces here and they had asked them to leave.
Oh, really?
Which was the first mistake, I believe.
So husband asked them to leave?
Yeah, saying we're a sovereign nation and we could take care of our own business, so we didn't need the outside security forces. So once they left, all of these things started to creep in. And so then you're caught up with displacement of people, because whenever the rebels would reach to any place, they would almost kill everybody and burn down everything. So by the time you heard, oh, the rebels are 3 days away, that whole town evacuates to the next town. And so it kept on going until everybody was again in the Montserrat belt where the capital city is. So we had to deal with displacement of people. At that point you can't farm, so there's no food, forget schools. So everything just kind of caved in.
Just 6 months after?
6 months after. So I find 5.5 years of just working to resolve. Of course there's no resolution, because the end result of what they started was that we would not let him stay as president and would do whatever we could to have him removed by force or by elections, which is 6 years later. So they harassed him and harassed the country. So a first lady in that situation is it was just one crisis or another crisis or another crisis.
So were you surprised at the verdict of the trial in The Hague?
Yes, I was.
Why?
And I must speak from my perspective and what I saw. Someone else might have seen something else, but I can only speak to what I saw. And the issues raised were not about Liberia. The issues raised were about the war in Sierra Leone and how somehow he should have been in control of the army in Sierra Leone, telling them what to do, so that all of the things that were done, amputation and killings of people, he ultimately had the responsibility because he was their commander. I never saw anyone from Sierra Leone. I never met not one person.
But were you with him all the time? Were you living with him?
I wasn't. He lived in another house and I lived in another house. But we interacted a lot. I went to a lot of meetings at the cabinet, and at times when people would come to visit, he would always make sure that I was there. So that's what I'm saying. As far as I saw, I didn't see the interaction that the...
So was he accused of killing people?
He was accused of commanding and controlling the army in Sierra Leone, for which he was held responsible. During the trial, at the end, and I listened to the verdict, I might be wrong, but I believe the judges said that they didn't find any direct link or control between him and the RUF, but somehow he was guilty of aiding and abetting, because he allowed them back and forth in our territory to buy food and to move safely across the border. His excuse was that we had an incursion on our government 6 months after he became president, and the RUF provided a buffer where rebels trying to enter our territory, because he became friends with them, with the RUF, did not cross over. But of course the Liberian border is really porous, and along all of the countries that we have borders with, you can just walk across the forest and across a little creek and you're in Guinea, or you're in Sierra Leone, or you're in the Ivory Coast, or you're in Guinea. And so they had him held responsible for the atrocities committed in Sierra Leone as a part of the international criminal laws that now affect nations.
So right now he's in prison?
Yes, on an appeal, waiting for an appeal from the appeals chamber, which I hope...
How do you feel about him, since he was a free man? It must be terrible for him in prison now.
I would like to think that it is. This is someone who loved the outdoors. He was an outdoor person. He wasn't someone who would sit in a house. So I can imagine how difficult it is just, sitting still in one place.
What kind of prison is he in now?
A UN prison. It's, the UN prisons are different from regular jails because while you're in this prison, you have not yet been adjudged guilty. So you have, amenities that...
Is it like a house?
No, it's actually a prison. It's a prison compound. But I haven't been there, but, there are pictures of it on the internet. It's just that it's a prison, but it has a lot of amenities that you might not have in a common, in a common prison.
So he's able to see people, because we hear he had a child while he was in prison.
Yes. And there are other...
but he didn't have that child with you?
No.
That was you?
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't.
How old is the youngest child?
My youngest is 17, and the youngest child he has, I think she's about 3 years old now.
Okay.
Yeah, but I haven't seen her. I think she's about 3.
How do the people of Liberia see you now that Charles Taylor is gone? And were they happy with the verdict? How did they feel?
I don't think Liberians per se were happy with the verdict.
Were they very unhappy about it?
Very unhappy about it. Somehow indicating if it was a Liberian story, and maybe it would make sense. But it wasn't about Liberia in many ways. It was a Sierra Leonean story.
Is the government supportive of the fact that he's in jail, or would they like him to be freed? What's the stance of the government of this?
The official stance of our government is that this case is an international case for which we have no fish to fry, and so they're not involved. Other countries, I believe, would have had, their embassies looking on him and just follow through to make sure he was getting, a fair trial, but they didn't get involved. We've been detached, really, from the entire process.
How's your relationship with the president?
Much, much better than it was. You can imagine 2005, we go into elections, I win my seat, and then she's going for the second round against George Weah. And so as a nation, we must decide. And I still think it's crazy, but Liberians come up with this thing and they say, well, we must choose between two evils. How can you choose between two evils? Two evils is evil on either side. But we had to make the choice of whether we wanted a George Weah without any experience and Ellen Johnson Sirleaf with all of the international acclaim and experience that she has. And so I had to make the choice which way I would go. And I said, well, I can't give my vote to George Weah. Of course, realizing, that the Taylor factor was still so very poignant in our country, she called and asked me for her support, for my support. And she had people come to see me first, can she give me her support? I said, well, if the president wants my support, she needs to call me so that we can talk. I might have some questions that I want to ask. And so she finally called and we sat down to talk about, the things that she wanted to do for Liberia and why she thought we were where we were. We had a real long conversation, and I actually endorsed her at the chagrin and anger of many people. Of course, when I did that endorsement without speaking to my husband at the time, I thought about it and I prayed about it, and I said, well, I thought that it would take us to a path of peace. And however difficult that road was, it would take us a little bit further out of where we were. And so that when I prayed about it and I said this is the right decision, I knew if I had discussed it with him, he would have said, don't do it. So I just went ahead and did my endorsement publicly without calling. So he gets the news and he's really furious and, he's angry and he's carrying on. And then he says to me, you've made a critical decision that one day you will cry about. And I said, why are you saying it? And he says, well, I can tell you that from the inauguration date that she's actually inaugurated, because once and I went out and said, Charles Taylor said we should support her. So, even though he didn't tell me, I said, well, the president says this is better for Liberia. So he was angry about that. He says, but 3 months after inauguration, if I'm not arrested, then I will really have to thank God.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then I said, but this is about Liberia. It's got to go beyond me and you. Of course, thinking that would never happen. Because when we spoke about it, I said, what is your take on the issue of former President Taylor in exile? And the arrangement with the African community was that he would go into exile and remain there without having been dragged back here and all of the things that we thought would happen. And she said, well, I'm not interested in it, and all of the African leaders have said that this is a done case. This was an arrangement with all of the top leaders of Africa that he should go into exile. And because he accepted, the arrangement is to leave him where he is. And I'm not going to get caught up in it. And then I said to her, well, knowing the international community, if they do force your hand, do me one favor. And she said, what? I said, at least call and let me know before it happens. And she said, okay, I will. But then he said, 3 months to inauguration, this is what's going to happen. And I said, no, she promised me that it's not going to happen. And he said, yeah, you're still a child, but we'll see how it goes. 3 months to the date, he gets arrested and sent to The Hague. So you can imagine, this is early on in her presidency. This is just January to March of 2006 when she's just taken over.
3 months to
3 months to the date, almost.
That's when he was
From
arrested.
her inauguration.
Exactly as he predicted. So I find myself now, of course, I'm now ostracized by the whole Taylor clan. Yeah, she, cahooted with President Salif to have him taken to jail because she's an angry wife. And so I find myself ostracized at the Senate because it's like, oh, because people, like I said, people still love him. And you're cut off from the party that you've been elected on, because whenever they see you, everybody's, grumbling and doing, oh yeah, she arranged, saying I was angry, the way our marriage was, all of the things that happened, and that I was trying to retaliate. And that's the perception that went across the country. And so I withdrew from everybody, and I would go to work and do what I could, but I wasn't really active. And then, of course, our relationship soured. And so for about the first 3 years of her term, we were really just on two different paths. But when you realize that you are part of a government, anything happens, I will also be held responsible. So after a long struggle with, all of the inner demons, and trying to, how do you explain that I wasn't involved? It didn't matter. People have that perception, and that's what they carried. So it was a quite difficult process for me. But after a while, you have to go to meetings, and then sometimes the legislature is called by the president. You must interact with respect, as you should. And so after a while, we've become a little bit closer to the point that we've agreed to work in the interest of our country, and I think that's where I am.
What's the difference between the work as a first lady and the work as a senator?
Traditionally, because first ladies are wives to presidents and heads of state, I think your work surrounds the executive, having luncheons and, doing in a normal situation, making the president and his guests and the meetings go well. I think that's what a normal first lady does. But I was forced out of that because we didn't have those normal situations to actually go out there, and I formed this task force to provide food and emergency supplies to the displaced camps. So I would go around every month to different places and make sure that whatever we're sending, would reach to some of the areas that we had to do. So I had to get involved in something completely different. What's different now is that, of course, we have peace, but the struggles with the reality of the level of poverty and is just too overwhelming.
So what do you think has contributed to your survival through all these things on the valley, in
just
the valley,
God's
on
grace.
the mountain?
Just God's grace. Just God's grace. Because I've gone to the edge of craziness, and just by 1 inch of someone calling and saying, don't do this or don't do that, you get pulled back, and then something else happens and it draws you back. It's been a dance back and forth.
What are you doing now? What exactly do you?
Well, I'm senator for the 3rd largest county in my country, representing the heartbeat of my nation.
But first of all, you're on your own now.
Yes.
You live on your own. Your husband is in.
But then I've done that for a while, I guess. I've done that for a while. And But it's now a different situation that I'm fully engaged with the development and the peace initiatives in my country and trying to make an impact in a positive way, so that one day history just doesn't record all of the negative things, but then, you know, there are some positive things that have come out of this family name that I bear. And so I have more than a double responsibility to work a little bit harder than most people do, so that I try my weak way with the grace of God to.
So what exactly do you do to help?
As senator of my county, I represent the people of Gbarnga County. I'm in the national legislature. I'm a member of the Ways, Means, Finance and Budget Committee. So we look at the national budget and allocate funds to improve the lives of our people, education and health and public works and civil government and all of that. And so I'm a major part of that committee, which I think...
So are you really part of the government now? Are you
Yes.
part of this government?
Yes. Our government is into three parts: the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. The executive that is headed by the president is the implementer. They implement all of the programs for which we allocate money. And so the three parts actually make up one government. So I am a part
So
of this government.
what's a senator?
Well, there are two houses. The lower house, we're 30 members in the upper house, and we must concur with all of the decisions that government makes. So if there is a MDA agreement with Mittal Steel or China Union, after the executive branch examines it and says, well, this is something good for Liberia, they bring it to our Senate and we vet it, and if it's okay, we have it passed. And then we oversee it to make sure those things that are promised in the agreements are actually done. So that's one part of what we do. But when we allocate money for whether it's schools or roads or hospitals, there are different committees, about 23 committees, that must look at health. For example, we gave $43 million out of the budget last year. Where are the schools being built? Or where are the clinics that are being built? Where are the nurses that are being trained? Because we lost a huge portion of our trained population during the war. A lot of our nurses and doctors and professional people are in the diaspora. A lot of them have not agreed to come home because when you get to Monrovia, you don't have adequate light, you don't have running water, you don't have place for your children to go to school and earn a decent education. So they've gotten used to the pleasantries of the West, and so they've decided they don't want to come. So we now have to train a whole new segment of people. So that's what makes what we do a little bit difficult, because it takes you almost 8 years to train a doctor. The medical school sends out maybe 2 or 3 doctors every year.
Your medical school turns out 2 or 3 doctors a year.
Yeah. Because it's a long, grueling process, especially after the war. So, you know, people have to make sure they know what they're doing. So you have 15 counties and you have 4 million people. Can you imagine 3 or 4 doctors? It makes it quite difficult. So the development process is a little slow because of the fact that we have to just retrain everybody.
So you have the Senate, that's the upper house.
Yes.
And what's the lower house?
The House of Representatives.
Okay. Are
they're-
those the congressmen?
Yes, yes. And there are
Okay.
about 79, I think.
Okay.
And there are 30 of us, 2 senators per county, and we have 15.
So can we now hold you responsible as part of the government? Can we ask questions? Can we ask you questions?
Of course, because I
As a
am a
father?
part of the government. There's no way I can divorce myself from it. There might be things happening that I don't have absolute control
The
over,
legislature,
but
yeah.
we're part of this.
What do you think will give Liberia prosperity? What do you think Liberia needs? I want to know what you think, and I'll tell you what I think.
I think we need God. We need a whole revolution of the spirit and the mind. And I wouldn't sit here and think anything else, because it's not, I believe it's not in our power as mere humans to do the kind of work that is needed to transform our nation. It's going to take the grace of God, but then we also must move into that direction and do the things that we must, because God's grace is not going to come in a vacuum. It's going to come in a place where people are aligned to His purposes and His will, and we're prepared to make the sacrifices that He wants us to make. And if we don't get to that point, we'll be spinning the wheel without having any impact, and we'll be spending money. Our budget went from $50 million in 2003 to almost $600 million today, but you still can't see the impact, and that's just money in the government. There's a lot more that comes from the international community in the different sectors. So they could say that they've given Liberia $1 billion a year for the last 5 years, but you still don't see it. So there's something wrong, and I think is tied into the fact that
we're far away from what God wants us to do, and if we don't get back to that place, I think we'll be stuck where we are for a while.
So what do you think?
What do I think? Yeah. I agree with what you said. That's part one. Part two is that every country that is poor does the same thing that every other poor country does. And every country that is rich does the same things that other rich countries do. What do poor countries do? Poor countries specialize in agriculture and in activities that we call diminishing return activities, like mining, farming, fishing, things that are governed by the iron laws of diminishing returns. It will just never be able to expand, and it does not create jobs, it does not create synergies, it does not allow other types of jobs to be created, outside the frame of the kind of activity they are doing. So the type of activity, like if you take a farmer and somebody who's growing tomatoes, somebody who's growing oranges, and somebody who's making iPods or iPads or mobile phones. I mean, the guy who's growing up oranges will never be prosperous as we compare with somebody who's coming out with mobile phones and iPads and so on. I mean, and all poor countries specialize in agriculture, and all famines occur in countries which specialize in agriculture. All hungry people are found in countries where they specialize in these kind of activities. And in fact, countries which have very little agriculture are countries where people die of overeating. Yeah. Wow. Like America. So as long as poor countries continue to specialize in the activities which cause countries to be poor, they will never be rich. Since I've been around Liberia, I've seen rubber plantations, I've seen iron ore, all these are diminishing return activities. And the thing about activities which are of a different kind, which we call increasing returns activities, like industries, and services, they create other jobs. Because if there is an industry, there's a huge factory or something that is making something, it will cause the barbers in the area, the bakers, the secretaries, those who build houses, masons, carpenters, everybody. It causes what we call synergies. So many other people have things to do. So all the poor countries are doing the same thing. All across Africa are doing this, and never rise up. Now the Western countries know this, and they allow us to import everything, and we make nothing. So no one has ever been able to prosper doing this kind of activity. It's like having children and saying to my child, I want you to be a cleaner. You be a cleaner, you be a security guard, you be whatever, and you tell some others, I want you to be a computer scientist, I want you to be a doctor, I want you to be a lawyer. You can tell from the kind of activity they are engaged in that this group is going to be poor and this group is going to be rich. Same thing with rich countries and poor countries. You can tell from the kind of activities they engage in that this country will be poor because of the nature of those activities. Those activities don't create wealth. They don't create wealth. It just creates a very small sector which produces what they produce, and then is subject to the markets which are what they call perfect markets. It's so perfect that the price for the oranges you are producing, you wake up in the morning, you read a newspaper, and you find out that, oh, there's so many more oranges in Cote d'Ivoire, so many more oranges came out of Guinea, so the price of orange has come down. And although you may have had the best harvest that year, you find that your oranges, your huge harvest of oranges are going very, very low. So you may get even less money for your oranges for that year, because these diminishing returns activities are subjected to these perfect markets. But the man in Japan who is making Land Cruisers and Toyotas when he wakes up in the morning, his products are subject to markets which are imperfect markets, and that means he can determine the price of his Toyota. Say, wow, you want the price of my Toyota to go down? No way. I'm increasing it by $10,000. And you don't want it, I keep it in my factory. It doesn't get old. Unlike your oranges, which are getting all rotten, and your tomatoes, which are getting rotten, which you have to sell for less price. So, you see, the country is subject to the iron laws of diminishing returns. Everything is going to get less. All the materials are going to get finished. The ground will stop yielding. I could see they've replanted lots of the rubber plantations, because obviously the old rubber trees were not working. So it's all producing nothing. The sea is getting empty. Fish are getting less. The mines are getting empty. So these laws of diminishing returns, plus the laws of the perfect markets, which just change the prices, forces the whole country, plus the absence of synergies, the absence of other jobs. For instance, a barber in New York will earn maybe $25 for cutting your hair, and a barber here would earn less than $1. Yeah, because he's the barber of a rubber plantation laborer. But that's a barber of an iPad inventor. All right. So a bus driver in Liberia would earn very little, but a bus driver in California, because he's the bus driver of the children of millionaires. All right. So every other job is also at a very low income level. So all poor countries are doing the same things, and we have opened our borders to the world markets, free trade, no tariffs, etc., which the Western world did not do and does not do. They do not do that, and we can never compare with them or do it. Our cows, our meat, our chicken cannot compare with their cows, their meat, which will never be sold there. No matter how many cows we make, no matter how much meat we come up with, every Swiss cow is supported with 4 times the amount of the GDP of an ordinary African, sub-Saharan African.
Wow.
They are sponsored. All their cows are sponsored. Their farms are sponsored. There is no way that our oranges, our tomatoes, our cassava, anything that we grow will ever be able to be sold anywhere. And nothing that we make, nothing. We have nothing to sell. So the whole country is subject to this way of doing things. So in the end, the country is just going down. It is a cycle, and it never really improves. So if we talk about improving things and going forward, you ask yourself, you've asked these children, you be a cleaner, you be a security guard, you be a washerman, you be a maid, all right? And you think they're ever going to rise up and they're ever going to do well. They will not. So once again, you see the iron going out of the country, but we don't making steel. We're not, and the presidents and these people, they are economists. They know these things. They've worked the World Banks. They know what's happening, and they know that when a country has even weak industries that are not even so strong, it's better than having no industries, And so you'd have countries like Peru, which before the IMF and so on went in there, they had weak industries and the wages were rising in those countries until the IMF came in. They introduced the no tariffs, whatever. All the industries died because you cannot sell your matches. You cannot compete with people making matches in there. They've perfected their industries. The prices are so low. So all your factories are forced to close. Your garment factories, your pajamas factories, your shirt factories, every factory is forced to close down. And so all the synergies and the jobs that are around those factories, the barbers, the bakers, the rice sellers, the dry rice sellers, everything, the hairdressers, everyone is forced to shut down or sell or operate at a very, very low level. So when you come to Africa, from the north to the south, it's the same picture, and we're just receiving aid, asking for money, getting money, and the leaders don't seem, not that they don't know, they do know, they have this knowledge. What I'm saying is historical, is the history of economics, the truth that no country has become rich by farming, and that America refused to be a nation of farmers. When the English people moved over there, they said, oh, you have the plantations, we have the industry. They said, no. They actually came up with a saying, and they said, do what the British did, but don't do what they say. Do what they did to become rich. Don't do what they say. Same thing Australia. When Australia was founded, they wanted them to just import things from. They said, no, we want our people to know how to do these things as well. And so they refused to obey those instructions, and they formed their own industries. So all rich countries operate in the same way, and all poor countries operate in the same ways, and they have the same type of economic activities. The type of economic activity that leads to poverty. They are subject to the iron laws of diminishing returns, the iron laws of no synergies, the iron laws of perfect markets, which change the prices of your oranges and your guavas and your mangoes at will. You just wake up in the morning, realize that my huge harvest is worth nothing this morning. I've worked, all my workers are here, thousands of workers, my oranges have no value. Everything has dropped at one because everybody had a good harvest of orange this year. So these people, all these are heads of state. They went to Harvard, they worked in America, they worked in the World Bank and all that. So when they come and they become the leaders of our countries, all right, that's why I asked you whether you are part of the government, because I wouldn't have asked you all this. But if you are part of the government, so my question is,
She's part of the legislature.
my question
is part of the government.
My question is, when are we going to sit up and not just be begging presidents and begging leaders who are just waiting for handouts? Because these handouts are coming, but they will never create any
value that we see.
They will never create any jobs. People will never really have jobs. Will always be dependent on the handouts and the gifts that are coming from the Western world. So when are we going to rise up? That's what I think Liberia needs to do. I think Liberia needs, otherwise there's no hope for not only Liberia, all the countries.
I suppose when we start doing all the things that you have said.
I know. You have to look at our school systems, which is maybe in the short run, this is where we must look in the midst of all of these. I don't know if you had time to visit any of our schools, you would be appalled.
Oh yeah, I mean, but it goes along with education.
That's what I'm
with
saying.
The teachers.
Yes.
I mean, because you
All
need
that is needed,
you would need people to run things. But we are raising our people. What work are they going to do when they finish the school? When they finish university? Prince Johnson told me that 85% of the people in Liberia are unemployed. So what are they going to do? So it's like, as you graduate from the university, what do you do? Where? I don't see any work. I mean, business, selling what?
Well, of course, they're doing sociology and all kinds of crazy things. They're not doing. Very few children are in the engineering departments. I haven't seen for a long time any new innovation that young children even get together and create something. That whole spirit isn't.
So why don't we refuse? You see, so they've made us the farmers here. So we farm the rubber.
Yeah, and then they make the money.
Then they make the money there. All right. We mine the iron ore, and they make the steel
and bring it back.
And they bring it back, and that is sold to us.
Anyway.
And this is what happened in England under King Henry the Seventh. All right. He said, no one should export cotton because
its raw form.
Yes, no one. And he made a law. He said, and they even were going to introduce the death sentence for exporting the raw material. And it forced the British to make garments themselves, right? And that created wealth. And the reason was because when he was a child, he was sent to Europe. And there he found out that the bakers were richer, the barbers were richer, the ordinary people seemed to be more prosperous, and they were making garments. And that was the industry that was there at the time. They were making garments, they were having industry. So when he became the king, then he said, no, we must make, because the farmers and the people who live in and around the farms are all poor, and everyone was poor in England. So when he introduced that law, and he began what the whole of Europe and America does, which is not exporting raw materials, and not being so silly as to export, not just adding value, but there's nothing like exporting anything. We are going to create masses of work right here for our people right here. That's what we don't do. And he started that was so in economics. They've all known that to export raw things is almost senseless. But that is what we do. Ghana, everywhere, we grow things, export. What do we export?
Even oil. We take
Oil,
cocoa,
we take it out,
we take cocoa
bring,
as
we
it is,
import
just
it back.
the beans, and then like you were saying,
An instant generation.
make
We
it
want
into-
instant gratification.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to wait for 6 months. Everybody wants,
Yeah.
what can I get now?
Yeah. Do you think everybody knows what I'm saying? You don't think so?
I thought agriculture would make people rich.
No. It's a type of activity. It's like you have two sets of children, cleaners, security guards,
Maids,
maids, and what?
washers.
And laborers on a construction site. And this side we have computer scientists, lawyers, doctors, pharmacists. Of course, this group is going to be a poor group. Why? Because of the type of
Activities,
activity they are engaged in. And that's the thing. The type of activity that we are engaged in as African countries is the kind of activity that is governed by iron laws. The laws of diminishing returns, perfect markets, and no synergies. No, it doesn't spark off or spiral off other types of work. Because this rubber plantation, it doesn't create any job for anybody.
because when rubber is in its raw
form.
state, that's not what we use. And instead of going to the next level, we export it as it is.
It doesn't
They
create any job
add
for
value
anybody.
to it, and they
And
bring
create
it back
jobs
to
on their
us.
side.
Huge
Yeah,
jobs.
and all our
huge
monies go
plantation.
to the West. We buy biscuits, we buy milk, we buy things that we could have made through our factories. But I think that in somewhere like Ghana, everybody knows that, at least the professors and the lecturers. And so I think it's more of translating.
Ghana is trying,
Really translating the theory.
I mean, when
into
you come from here,
practical.
you guys have huge industries. A lot of local processing. At least there's something being done.
Oh, there's much more than here.
It's
I mean, I
not
can
enough,
see
though.
that Ghana is ahead in many ways.
You wanna
We've also
switch
not had
places?
war.
Switch places
No.
to live or what?
Oh, in
Everything that's in
countries.
Ghana will come here and then we will go over there.
No.
No, they're trying. They're
Ghana
trying.
has also not had any wars
trying.
by the grace of God.
We've had coups. We've had a
So
number
war
of coups.
also sets you back. Wouldn't you say so?
Yes.
Was it
Definitely.
a terrible time, the war time?
Because everybody was displaced, the entire country. So by the time you take 30 years to just figure out, where am I
going?
from?
Yeah.
Where
So were there
where-
shots all over?
The whole country was bullet ridden. You've come at a good time. A lot of the places have been rehabilitated. Before, about maybe 3 years ago, you would drive through Monrovia, you would still see, rocket holes through the buildings and different things. It's getting better. But like he says, we're a begging country. We're going out there begging, what can you help me with, what you can. The money comes in and we put it into things that have no ripple effect. We buy cars and we go on vacation and we buy fuel oil for the generators. Those things that have no return. There's not one
And that
industry.
line other people's pockets.
There's not one industry.
Not one.
No one. There's no one of this. The activities I was
Not
talking
that-
on this side.
not at all.
So because of that, there will be nothing. So we saw the railroads. We saw the iron ore going out, and we see that.
that's it.
Yeah, and it's all investment. You think that there's some money for the nation, but there's nothing. When I saw it, my heart was broken. I said, there's nothing for Liberia. There's nothing. You'll get some amounts on payment, but it's
temporary.
it's a type of activity, and it just blankets the whole country with poverty. And the leaders of our countries know these things, but you see, wisdom is the ability to apply knowledge, the knowledge of what you learned in school, but how to apply it practically. In Liberia after the war, that's wisdom. That's the definition of wisdom in the dictionary. Is the ability to apply the knowledge that you gain, the experience, the knowledge, the know-how. And that's what happens when people get in there. It's like how to apply what I learned in Harvard. So anyway, sometimes when I meet those of you who are in government and in politics, I'm bursting with questions like, when are we going to do, certain things?
We're in a really critical place, and I think your visit just reminds us of where we are, as precarious as it is, and where we need to return to. And I want to thank you really on behalf of the people of Gbarnga County specifically, because we were blessed by your presence. But of course, on behalf of the people of Liberia, those who have gotten a chance to interact at the crusades, and the Christian leaders who've gotten a chance to sit and listen to your teachings, hopefully it rubs off on them so that they can continue to do that which they must do at the greater community. I'm really, really, really grateful that God provided us such a unique opportunity for your presence, and we're grateful.
Shall we invite Honorable Jewel Taylor to come to give us a greeting? Clap your hands for Jesus.
Hallelujah! Praise the name of Jesus Christ. It is a privilege and an honor to be given such an opportunity to greet the people of God. We want to thank him for this magnificent opportunity to break new barriers in our county, to help us transform our lives, and to bring us closer to what we should be, people living under the unction of Jesus Christ and following his word. And so we honor you tonight, our guests. We thank you for bringing a cloud of witnesses to help us realign ourselves. So today we just want to hear from him and hear from heaven, so I'm not going to talk long, but I want to say praise